Breaking news tonight centers on an extraordinary diplomatic incident that's sending shockwaves through economic and political circles. What began as a straightforward request for industrial equipment has morphed into something far more significant, a potential turning point in international trade relations. The initial request recent weeks saw Donald Trump pursuing accelerated access to essential industrial machinery. We're discussing high-value construction and extraction equipment, primarily manufactured across Canada, Germany, and parts of East Asia. These aren't simple purchases. They represent tens of billions in contracted assets already committed to existing clients. Reports from major financial publications including Reuters, Bloomberg, and the Financial Times indicate Trump sought to bypass standard delivery schedules and rearrange export priorities. The proposed timeline? Months instead of the usual years-long planning cycles. The unprecedented response. What makes this situation remarkable isn't the request itself, it's the reaction. Instead of typical diplomatic language, negotiation tactics, or compromise proposals, decision-makers responded with stark brevity, a flat rejection. This denial came from a manufacturing powerhouse responsible for approximately 22% of American heavy industrial imports, based on 2024 trade figures. Market watchers immediately recognized this moment's significance. Why does this matter? This transcends simple equipment transactions. We're witnessing a confrontation over supply chain control, economic influence, and determining who yields under pressure. Understanding the broader context, current circumstances make this particularly explosive. Since June 2026, American aluminum costs have skyrocketed by 40%, exceeding $5,200 per metric ton, unprecedented territory. U.S. aluminum reserves tell an alarming story, plummeting from 750,000 tons in early 2025 to under 300,000 tons currently. That's a catastrophic 60% reduction in just 12 months. Construction companies nationwide are struggling with postponed projects and ballooning budgets. The Midwest aluminum premium has hit record levels at 96 cents per pound, up 65% since June alone. Canadian suppliers, who furnish roughly 70% of America's nearly 4 million tons of aluminum imports, have ceased optional shipments. The reason? Trump's 50% tariff structure makes these transactions unprofitable. Real-world impact: picture a construction supervisor in Ohio waiting for machinery that never arrives for a government-funded project. Each passing month brings risks: workforce reductions, financial penalties, canceled agreements. Now multiply this scenario across thousands of projects nationwide. That single word, refusal, threatens to create cascading effects from manufacturing facilities to executive suites to diplomatic negotiations. The supply chain reality. To grasp why this situation escalated so rapidly, we need to understand industrial machinery supply chains and Trump's position when making this request. These machines aren't standard interchangeable parts. Individual high-capacity excavators or turbine transporters carry $5 million price tags, demand 12 to 24-month production lead times, and rely on hundreds of component suppliers. OECD information reveals that over 68% of specialized industrial equipment used in major American projects comes from abroad. This dependency creates vulnerability. Trump's request essentially attempted to reorder priority access, jumping ahead of other buyers. Experts characterize this as testing economic influence, determining whether political pressure could override standard contractual obligations. Canada's strategic position. The supplying nation, specifically Canada under Prime Minister Mark Carney, faced its own limitations. Workforce shortages, energy expenses up 31% since 2022, and existing obligations tied to climate infrastructure initiatives. More importantly, Carney recognized Canada's unusual leverage advantage at this precise moment. How we reached this crisis point when President Trump doubled aluminum tariffs to 50% in June 2025. The stated objective involved encouraging domestic production investment and decreasing import dependence. However, tariffs don't produce instant results. Building new aluminum smelters requires years of preparation, billions in capital, and intricate supply networks. Meanwhile, American industries need aluminum immediately for automobiles, aircraft, construction, and countless other applications. Canadian exporters evaluated the economics, and concluded they couldn't profitably ship aluminum to America under the revised tariff framework. The premiums Americans paid didn't adequately cover the 50% duty. Canadian producers made the rational business decision, redirecting shipments to Europe and alternative markets where profitability remained viable. This left American inventories collapsing. Gregory Whitbecker, president at Whitson Commodity Advisors, explained clearly that Canadian suppliers discontinued optional U.S. shipments due to financial losses, causing inventory drops. Jorge Vasquez, managing director at Harbor Aluminum, observed that current Midwest premiums of 96 cents per pound far exceed justified costs, estimating they should hover around 86 cents. The market is factoring in both actual shortages and expectations of continued price increases. Historical parallels history provides context. The 1973 oil embargo demonstrated how quickly supply leverage can shift power dynamics. More recently, the 2021 semiconductor shortage cost global automakers over $210 billion due to supply disruptions. This situation follows identical logic. Consider it like airport operations. You can demand priority landing, but if the runway's fully occupied, someone must divert or delay. The refusal wasn't personal. It was structural, yet also strategic. Carney's calculation. Mark Carney, former governor of both the Bank of Canada and Bank of England, who became prime minister with a clear mandate, made a crucial calculation. Canada's negotiating power is currently at its peak precisely because American industries are suffering under Trump's own policies. The aluminum shortage, construction postponements, manufacturing cost pressures, these are self-inflicted injuries. Carney understood that accommodating Trump's urgent demands would surrender Canada's strongest bargaining position right before the critical USMCA review scheduled for July 2026. From a strategic game theory perspective, if Canada immediately provides what Trump needs, it relieves pressure on American industries, eliminating Trump's incentive for serious broader trade negotiations. But if Canada holds firm, the pain intensifies for U.S. manufacturers, construction firms, and ultimately American consumers paying higher prices. That pain generates political pressure on Trump to reach genuine agreements, not merely demand concessions. Market reactions following that rejection, markets responded. U.S. infrastructure company shares dropped 3 to 5% within days. Logistics insurers adjusted risk calculations. Trade experts began modeling retaliation scenarios. Construction sector devastation. The construction industry is taking severe hits. This sector depends on reliable, predictable supplies of aluminum, steel, and heavy machinery. Tariff tensions have created the opposite: chaos, unpredictability, and soaring costs. Analysis from the Association of Equipment Dealers warned about tariff impacts on heavy equipment, parts, and related supplies, noting that uncertainty has become the defining characteristic of 2026 business planning. Experts caution this moment reveals a fundamental problem. Political demands cannot create capacity that doesn't exist. When leaders push anyway, the system resists. Who feels the impact first? Let's examine the affected categories, because impacts are widespread and severe. Manufacturing plants. In Michigan and Pennsylvania, machinery-dependent facilities face scheduling chaos. One delayed shipment can temporarily idle 300 to 500 workers. For families already managing inflation, even brief disruptions matter significantly. Energy projects. In Texas, infrastructure initiatives risk major cost overruns. Contractors warn delays could add 82% to total expenses. Construction projects. Nationwide, construction faces delays and budget overruns directly linked to aluminum shortages and equipment access problems. When an Ohio commercial building project needs aluminum framing and prices have surged 40% in 6 months, those costs don't vanish. They transfer to developers, then tenants, then consumers. Workers face uncertainty about continued employment. Families planning renovations see quotes explode because contractors cannot secure materials at predictable costs. Automotive industry vulnerability. The automotive sector faces particular risk. Aluminum is essential for modern vehicle manufacturing, especially as companies shift toward electric vehicles requiring lightweight materials for battery efficiency. Ford, General Motors and other manufacturers, depending on steady aluminum supplies, now confront record costs that squeeze already narrow profit margins. This could mean higher vehicle prices for American buyers, production slowdowns, or even facility closures if shortages intensify. Small business crisis. Consider a mid-sized Arizona construction firm with fixed-price contracts. Without timely machinery, penalties accumulate. Profits evaporate. Owners face workforce reductions or bankruptcy, not from lack of demand, but lack of access. Small construction businesses are suffering especially. Unlike massive corporations, small contractors cannot absorb sudden 40% material cost increases. They operate on tight margins, fixed bids, and limited capital access. When a small Texas roofing company locked in contract prices 6 months ago and now faces exploded aluminum costs, that company either loses money or risks contract breach. Some will fail completely. We're discussing real businesses employing real people facing existential threats. Corporate sector response. Major corporations have disclosed supply risk exposure in SEC filings. Analysts note capital expenditure plans may face downward revisions if uncertainty continues. Caterpillar, a major equipment manufacturer, experienced stock fluctuations tied to tariff impacts. The aerospace sector, requiring specialized aluminum alloys, reports supply chain disruptions. Even the packaging industry, beverage cans, food containers, faces higher costs, ultimately translating to elevated grocery store prices. Alcoa, among America's largest aluminum producers, has benefited from higher prices but cannot rapidly expand production to meet demand. International reactions. European trade officials have emphasized contract integrity. Asian suppliers watch closely, cautious about precedent-setting political interference. Canada's pivot toward China is accelerating. Prime Minister Carney visited Beijing on January 12, 2026, seeking to resolve past tensions and expand trade relationships as America becomes what he termed no longer a reliable partner. This represents a fundamental geopolitical shift. For decades, Canada's economy integrated tightly with America's. Now, Canadian leaders actively pursue alternatives. The European Union observes this crisis as a cautionary tale. If Trump's tariff strategy can backfire this dramatically with America's closest ally and largest trading partner, what implications exist for transatlantic trade relations? Mexico, the third USMCA partner, is also recalculating its position, recognizing Canada's firm stance might create opportunities for improved Mexican negotiating leverage. Brookings Institution experts warned that politicizing industrial supply chains accelerates fragmentation, making everything costlier. Ripple effects span transportation, energy, housing, and even defense readiness, all triggered by a single refusal. Expert analysis. One senior trade analyst told Bloomberg, "This wasn't a negotiation failure. It was a reality check." Another economist cautioned that short-term escalation could harden positions across future discussions. The expert community is divided but increasingly concerned. Jorge Vasquez from Harbor Aluminum stated directly that premiums far exceed cost justifications. He's warning current prices reflect not just supply-demand fundamentals, but market psychology, fear of worse shortages ahead. Gregory Whitbecker expressed doubts about continued premium increases, suggesting we might approach a breaking point where prices become so extreme that demand destruction occurs, meaning projects simply get canceled. Legal and economic complications. This situation creates unprecedented complications from legal and economic perspectives. The USMCA agreement includes dispute resolution mechanisms, but those processes require months or years. Meanwhile, businesses need aluminum today. Some legal experts suggest Trump could invoke national security provisions to compel Canadian cooperation, but that would likely trigger immediate retaliation and could collapse the entire trade framework. Legally, overriding contracts risks arbitration. Politically, it raises credibility questions. Economically, it reinforces movement away from centralized dependence. Political reactions are intensifying within the Republican Party. Growing tension exists between Trump's populist tariff approach and traditional pro-business conservatives hearing from corporate constituents about real pain. Democrats are seizing on the crisis as evidence of failed economic policy, with several prominent senators calling for hearings on the aluminum shortage and its competitive impacts. Canadian political reactions matter too. Carney's approval ratings have actually risen following his firm stance. Canadians across the political spectrum are tired of what they perceive as bullying from Washington. Even conservatives who typically favor closer U.S. ties are supporting Carney's position, recognizing Canada needs to defend its interests. This domestic political support gives Carney more room to maintain his hardline approach. Short-term outlook: the next 30 to 90 days are critical. Watch for delayed project announcements, revised budgets, and intensified back-channel discussions. Construction projects scheduled to begin this spring could face delays or cancellations. Manufacturing plants might reduce shifts or temporarily close aluminum-dependent lines. The aerospace sector could see commercial aircraft delivery delays. Consumer prices for aluminum-intensive products, from cars to canned beverages, will likely continue rising. Medium-term risks. Over the next 6 to 12 months, the bigger risk is structural. Partners diversify away, reducing long-term U.S. leverage. If this standoff continues through the July USMCA review, we could witness complete breakdown of trade negotiations. Trump might threaten USMCA withdrawal entirely, throwing North American trade into chaos. Alternatively, mounting pressure from American industries could force Trump to back down, accept less favorable terms, and remove or reduce the tariffs that created this situation. This isn't collapse, but it is constraint, and constraint reshapes power dynamics. Summary: let's review. A request for heavy machinery exposed fragile supply chains built on decades of integration, now crumbling under tariff pressure. A one-word refusal triggered economic and political ripples already hitting American workers, construction firms, and manufacturing plants. The fallout now threatens not just immediate projects, but the entire framework of North American trade diplomacy heading into the critical USMCA review. The core lesson, the takeaway, is straightforward. Power doesn't derive from demands. It comes from leverage you can actually enforce. Trump's tariffs were supposed to create American leverage. Instead, they created desperate dependence. When Carney recognized that vulnerability, he called the bluff with one word that may reshape continental economics for years. Final question. So here's the question. Was this refusal a warning shot or the beginning of deeper realignment? If you want to stay informed on stories mainstream media won't fully cover, make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell icon. Because in today's economy, the quietest word can cause the loudest shockwaves. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.